So part two, we're going to look at how to decide if you should lease or buy a vehicle generally. So whether that's an EV or a petrol vehicle, and then look at sort of the comparison between both. So I think this was one for you, Sarah. So
Yeah.
should you lease or buy any car, I suppose, to start with?
Okay. So, look, there's kind of benefits to kind of both angles, which we can kind of
Hmm.
come on to. Just kind of back to electric vehicles, which is obviously what we're heavily talking about. There are tax benefits for both leasing and buying an electric vehicle. Some of the biggest advantages that we see with leasing vehicles, is that often the kind of cost price and the P11D value of electric vehicles opposed to petrol diesel vehicles tend to be higher. So it's kind of a much less cost outlay to lease a vehicle today and much easily accessible into electric vehicles. For example, on a lease contract, you can put as little as 1 month up front on the lease payment. It's fixed monthly payments as well. So from an individual or a business perspective, you haven't got to worry about what that vehicle, from a residual value, from a depreciation cost, in a clearly ever changing market at the moment, and an evolving product market as well, as to what that vehicle will be worth at the end of the contract.
Hmm.
So we see that electric vehicles, especially at the moment, are just kind of hassle free via a lease, and you know exactly what you're paying month by month on a lease.
Interesting. Okay, and around the sort of salary sacrifice part,
Yeah.
what's the, I suppose, the big difference, and I suppose between a combustion engine and an EV, and I think then maybe we come on to how does it differ as an employee versus an employer, whether you
Yeah.
decide
Okay.
which one to go for.
So essentially, a salary sacrifice is where an employee forgoes a portion of their salary in exchange for a brand new, fully maintained, insured, brand new electric vehicle. And the employee can save up to 40% on tax, so income tax, whether you're a lower rate or higher rate taxpayer, and also national insurance as well. So, from an employee perspective at the moment, there's obviously huge tax benefits on EVs via that kind of SALSAC route. And then from an employer, from a company perspective, it's not only a benefit that they can pass on to employees, that helps to attract, reward, and retain employees, but also from a company perspective, it helps them reduce their national insurance costs as well, because the gross salary from an employee is being reduced in exchange for a vehicle. And back to your question on kind of EVs versus petrol. So with a salary sacrifice, the contract for the vehicle is actually in the company name, so in the employer name. So it does actually attract for the employee what's called benefit in kind tax, also known as company car tax. It acts as a company car, and the savings on benefit in kind at the moment on electric vehicles is as low as 2%, which is fixed until April 2025, and then goes up in increments from 1% until April 2028. So the savings at the minute on EVs allow you to make the maximum savings from an employee perspective on the tax and national insurance. So that's EVs on SALSAC is by far the cost efficient way to drive an EV at the moment.
Interesting. Okay, and so are you see with sort of the leasing you do, are you seeing a big switch towards electric for that reason, or are you
Absolutely.
finding it sort of
Yeah.
has stayed more combustion?
No, absolutely. So
Mm.
salary sacrifice is kind of really driving EV, not just with us at the minute, Select Car Leasing, but across the leasing industry. And there's many large corporates, SMEs that are, if they haven't already got this type of scheme set up already within their business, that they're thinking about salary sacrifice, and that is often actually a driver from the employee. The more kind of people that are kind of hearing about the savings that are available on EVs at the moment, the more they're kind of talking amongst each other. And if it's not available as in the scheme with their company that they work for, they're kind of trying to get it installed and kind of talking to providers like us at Select, that can help get them set up.
Yeah, that makes sense. And actually, the fact they're talking about it suggests what you were saying, Shane. Saying earlier, Shane, was the fact that that fear aspect disappears when people start to understand the realities
Yeah.
of using them day to day and hearing others actually having a good experience rather than the headlines.
100%, and also tax savings also help us. Sarah will tell you that does certainly drive it in the same direction.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just kind of on that, I would kind of suggest anybody today that's looking to get into an electric vehicle that if if through their employer that they don't have the ability to get into a company car, if they do, company car route and go in electric will have huge tax savings on the benefit in kind. But if you don't get a company car within your package today, be talking to your employer about salary sacrifice, because it's not only an employee benefit, there's huge benefits as a company that actually some companies still aren't aware of, in the reduction in, as I say, national insurance costs from reducing salaries, and from a kind of every company at the minute is looking at their carbon footprint, their ESG as a business, and this can really kind of tick those boxes.
That's a very nice point, actually, because you don't want to just assume because there isn't a company car scheme, you're going to have to look at it from a personal route. Um, I, I suppose actually one question I've got there then is within the surveying industry, you have like any industry, you've got a mix of obviously sole practitioners all the way through to enterprise, but there's definitely a heavier weighting on sole practitioners, smaller businesses. If you're, I suppose, on the sole practitioner side, you've got your own business, you work for yourself. What's best? Is it better to try and set up your own company car scheme or salary sacrifice through your business, or are you better off looking at it from a personal perspective and
So it kind of depends on kind of how kind of potentially in the self-employed kind of side of how they're kind of paid, in terms of whether or not that they pay themselves a salary, and whether or not kind of taking the salary reduction will mean that they in turn pay less tax and national insurance. It still stands by, if you've got the ability to lease a car through a business, then you've got the ability of kind of reclaiming the VAT element if you can do that. Alternatively, absolutely looking at a personal lease. The pros of leasing are still there, in that there's not that kind of huge cash outlay on a vehicle. It's fixed monthly payments. You know exactly what you're paying for that vehicle. You can have the maintenance included, the MOT, roadside assistance, the road fund license. If it's kind of petrol, there's still kind of all the other benefits of, and that's why it's so important to talk in your individual circumstances of kind of the business that you have, and how kind of you pay yourself a salary, of talking to kind of us as the experts of what works for you individually, and working with your accountant as well to make sure that you choose the right route for you.
yeah, I appreciate it. It's difficult to give generalist advice because obviously every case is
Yeah,
quite specific.
yeah.
So my final question, I think, around the sort of which route should you go generally is if people are thinking about whether they own a car or own and buy a car, or whether they lease. There's obviously different factors to take into account. So if you buy, you potentially have to have a higher cash outlay. Maybe you finance it. Obviously, there's the interest then, but you have an asset at the end you can sell. Obviously, there's been
Yeah,
depreciation for how long you've had it. Um, on the leasing route, you don't have any of that headache, and so it's just and everything's dealt with. It's a lot simpler. Um,
Yeah.
how do people weigh that up in terms of what are the factors to consider around the lease buy cost aspects, all that type of stuff?
I think that argument's always been there, and this is why a lot of people come to leasing. In my mind, leasing a vehicle is probably the most cost-effective way of keeping a vehicle on the road, but that's just me personally. Everybody's slightly different in their views on this. But you factor this in as you will. You're right. You own, well, like, you've got something at the end of it. The problem is, for me, and the concern for myself as why I lease, is that it's uncertain. You don't know what that's going
Yeah.
to be worth.
yeah,
No.
Then you've got the method of disposal, problems with this. And then you've got, particularly at the moment, this emerging new technology that's changing so rapidly
Yeah.
that you get left behind with old technology. And we've seen this in the expanded ULEZ zones where people have got perfectly good cars. You probably heard about them lobbying against it, hoping it wasn't going to happen. It did. We get them on the phone. They're desperate for a car because they've been charged £12.50 a day to go home to their own home, or parking on the fringes, having to walk 10 minutes back from a road down the road which is not in that zone, which is crazy. That's only set to get worse. And also the technologies we know with EVs, it's not like combustion engine where we know that they've got to a limit, to a degree where they can get this MPG back. They've been working on it for a few years, and it's gone as far as it probably can get within reason. Whereas electric cars, you're seeing more developments, more efficiency on the batteries and motors, new different types of technology, solid state batteries coming our way. All these things are going to help improve. With that in mind, I wouldn't want to own anything.
yeah.
It's
Won't want
just
to
too
predict what
risky.
that would be. Yeah.
People that buy things tend to don't like taking risk. For me, that's taking a massive risk.
It's a very interesting point, yeah, because we've seen that. I live quite close to London, and I've seen plenty of people have to get rid of cars that technically are fine. Okay, fine, they don't
Yep.
meet the ULEZ requirement, but then there was the whole debate around what do you buy next, and it might be compliant now. Is it compliant in a year or 2 or 3 years? And then you've got the same issue again if you've got to try and sell it at a low price because it's not compliant in a lot of areas, and then you've got to try and buy something that's more expensive that is. So you're right. It's actually it is quite a risky process these days that it probably wasn't before.
It is, yeah. It is. I mean, it's these cars can lose 50% plus sometimes on the residual value after 3 years. If it was a house, you probably wouldn't buy it, right?
No. If it was that uncertain, I don't think you would.
No.
But possibly I'd get a surveyor. So that's the right podcast to be on.
There you go. Good plug there for you.
Is there anything else that's worth looking at around the sort of leasing process, lease or buy, and salary sacrifice areas, or have we covered a lot of that, do you think?
I think just probably one part that we've kind of missed a little bit comparing petrol, diesel versus electric. Obviously, there is a middle ground in there. There's plug-in hybrids as well. And actually, in going back to kind of some of our earlier questions and answers around actually what mileage are you doing each day and each week, and whether or not you can transition now to electric, and whether or not you have that ability to charge at home, off street. There is kind of like that middle kind of step that we've got time for. Obviously, we've had the extension given by the government around electric vehicles and that kind of ban. For some people, it's kind of opened out actually a little bit more breathing space to think about, okay, don't feel I'm quite ready yet to move to electric. There's that kind of stopgap of the plug-in hybrids. And that kind of linked to salary sacrifice. It can be done through salary sacrifice, but just the savings just aren't as great just because you're paying higher benefit in kind on plug-in hybrids. And then just kind of one last thing from me would be used car leasing as well. So actually we're seeing now more used vehicles coming round after the 2, 3, 4 year contracts. Something that we've really that's really taken off with us here at Select is vehicles coming around after contract, and we're seeing some really great kind of lease rates on those vehicles. And that again is electric, plug-in hybrid, and it's petrol diesel models as well, so even more affordable ways to get into leasing if you're not quite can afford that kind of step to a brand new vehicle.
That's a really interesting point there. What's driving that, do you think? Is it the fact that the cars are so good anyway now that even if it is 3 years old, it's still a fantastic car, or is it the cost of living? What's changing with sort of perceptions around, or what consumer habits around that?
I think it's both, to be honest, and I think it's obviously seeing kind of used car prices after kind of 3, 4 years within leasing companies. Actually, they've got lots of life left in these vehicles, to be honest, and actually clearly there's someone sat in leasing companies that are kind of working out the residual values and depreciations, which I probably wouldn't like that job today in this kind of ever evolving market, but they're seeing an opportunity there with vehicles coming back after those contracts and seeing another lifespan that's available. And it just shows back to people wondering how long these batteries are going to last. Well, look, we're seeing new vehicles go around a complete cycle with the lease contract, and they're going out again. And leasing companies wouldn't be doing that if it wasn't possible to be doing so.